Frank, welcome. Thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I understand that you are one of the leading futurists at TCS. You look at technology beyond 10 years. I'd love to kind of get a sense of what are some trends that you're seeing about the future? And then, my next question is going to be, why is that important for folks right now to think about?
Well, I think the most important trend, and I hate to use the word trend, but the phenomena, if you will, is really the pace phenomena. The word exponential comes up a lot. And it's interesting that folks kind of think back to 2006 as that point in time, and obviously the smartphone dates back to those periods. That 2006 is really when this pace phenomena started, and many believe that 2013, if you're familiar with the second half of the chessboard phenomena, that 2013 through Moore's law is really when that second half of the chessboard was realized. And so everything that's been happening since then is happening on just a massive pace and scale. And so one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is that this pace phenomena is outpacing our institutions, our structures, any leader's ability to really deal with the pace. And so I think the biggest issue for any leader around the world, whether it's business or government, is the pace of change that they're likely to experience. And for that matter, us as humans, they say that human beings generally deal with one big paradigm shift in their lifetime. I believe we're going to see so many paradigm shifts in our lifetime that it's going to be hard to fathom the transformational impact of all of that. So I think the biggest issue is the issue of pace and the fact that the sciences and the technologies are combining in ways that we just couldn't imagine in the past.
Wow. Who's disrupting the world these days?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Tell me some of the business disruptions that you're seeing, some trends you're seeing.
Well, the biggest disruption, and of course, we talk about disruption to a market or to a business, but let's start first from the disruption of structurally a business's ability to maintain their core and also drive growth. So the phenomenon that we're seeing is that growth, and in a lot of cases, growth in non-traditional sources of revenue is really the future for most companies, but they're weighed down by their legacy environments, their traditional structures, their traditional ways of thinking and doing things. So the disruption, if you will, is occurring right at the fabric of every company, the cultures of the companies, and how they deal with what I referenced before in terms of the pace. So that's disruption at really the core foundation of an organization. Disruption in terms of think about just one scenario, the autonomous vehicle, which I spent an awful lot of time talking about. What people don't grasp is the sheer breadth of impact of just one scenario. So when you think about the driverless car, we obviously think about maybe we don't have to drive in the future, and maybe we won't own cars in the future. Of course, they're specific to the car. But think about impacts to insurers who will lose their P&C book of business, to cities who no longer have truck drivers driving through them and spending money while they're traveling and commuting through cities, to repair shops that don't have to worry about repairing cars anymore, and to the whole value chain in the auto ecosystem. That's a massive disruption, not just in the context of the car, but even cities were designed around the car. So the design of a city in the future will change it massively. So one scenario, the driverless car, massively impactful and disruptive.
Any other scenarios other than the autonomous car?
Oh yeah. So let's talk about healthy life extension. These are all scenarios that I track on a visual that I created several years ago. And healthy life extension speaks to the sciences and technologies combining in ways that will allow us to extend our lives in a healthy fashion. So I talk in keynotes all the time about the fact that many believe the first person to live to 200 has already been born. So think about that phenomena. A third of a year of longevity per year. We believe that a year per year of longevity, not too distant future, 2020 to 2022. And so if you can extend your healthy lives and live to 115, 120, 130, whatever the case is, think about the implications of things like retirement and the financial services industry, and even institutions like marriage and having children. What does that mean anymore when you think about the fact that you might live that long? And of course, at the highest end of this discussion, there are many, like Ray Kurzweil at Google, who believe that we'll eliminate death altogether somewhere down the road through rejuvenation technologies. That's massively transformative and disruptive. And the other one that I talk about a lot is the human-machine convergence phenomena, and the fact that many believe that we're going to birth the next species. A hybrid human-machine will be the next species to populate the Earth. And then you just start connecting dots. If you are part machine, do you eliminate the inability to colonize other planets? And so Elon Musk and his agenda would speak to the fact that if we do these things, we'll be able to get off the Earth and populate other planets. And of course, we know folks think that's a paramount of importance to move on. So all of these things, when you think about a business and when you talk about transformation, that's what I try to focus on. Think about these scenarios and how massively impactful they are. And then come back and think about how you currently think about transformation. I think you'll see there's a gap.
Tell me the 3 major gaps you see, if I can ask that question.
In terms of leadership thinking?
Sure.
Well, so the first gap is, it's like the 12-step program. It's acknowledging we have a problem, right? So gap number 1 is just an acknowledgement that change is required. And I think the inertia in most companies is such that you resist the notion that there's change required. And I hear this all the time. Well, why do we need to change? We've been doing this for years and we're doing really well, thank you. So one, the gap of that's caused by inertia and acknowledging that we have a problem. The other gap, as I said before, is structural. You think about our current institutions and structures, and by that I mean things like the healthcare industry, even religion, every institution and structure. It dates back years, if not centuries, right? So our current industrial era thinking is built in a different paradigm, and mainly a manufacturing paradigm. So the other big gap is that structurally, we were built for a different time, right? So how do you now structurally change in a way that allows you to be relevant and maintain viability in the current time? And this problem, I'd say the internet accelerated a realization of this problem. It just didn't get acute enough until now, and I attribute the pace phenomena for that. So now it's becoming very obvious. Let's look at Uber, the Uber phenomena, and just how stressful that's been to the regulatory constructs of our day, right? You can't undermine the value that was created by Uber. We can see this as Uber continues to thrive, but at the same time, it stresses a regulatory environment's ability to deal with the pace of value creation. So what gives? Does the regulatory construct stifle innovation, or does innovation drive an agile regulatory process? Right? So gap number 2, I think, is primarily structural. And gap number 3, the biggest gap, is the learning paradigm of our day. I'm a big believer that the issues of jobs, which I get questions on all the time, and automation and what that might do to jobs, is a real issue. But underpinning all that is the learning institutions that currently exist. We all need to be lifelong learners if we're going to survive in the future. But our learning paradigm doesn't support lifelong learning. Our mental models don't. So what's going to happen to our education systems, our learning paradigms? Does virtual reality and augmented reality play a major role in how we learn going forward and continually learn going forward? So the bigger gap, I think, in companies and organizations worldwide is a gap in their learning capacity.
I want to go back to something you said earlier. So I am a mayor of a city. I am a mechanic owner. I am whatever. And the autonomous car now comes out. What are the questions I should now be asking myself so that I can prepare for these gaps that I'm going to start to notice with? I'm just giving you an example of the autonomous car.
Yep. So the question that I'm asking folks to ask themselves is, when these scenarios play out, like the car, it basically is a mobility discussion. So mobility is changing and evolving, and it's going to require an ecosystem to create what's likely going to be mobility as a service, right? So think about this in the context of mobility itself is shifting, the car being foundational, but mobility itself is shifting. And an ecosystem is forming around that to actually drive the shift. So you're a fleet management company, and you have to realize at this point in time that as a fleet manager, what does the fleet of the future look like? Is it a transportation network of autonomous vehicles that really pull up to your door and take you where you need to go as a service, and ownership disappears? And so first and foremost, what is the scenario? What kinds of ecosystem forms around it to create that scenario? And what is my role going forward in the context of that emerging ecosystem? So those are the biggest things that we talk to. But then the other one, and this is interesting because I think that there's a significant leadership gap right here, and that is there's so many dots that have to be connected to really envision where these things are going to go. And it's not a really strong trait for most people to not only see the dots, but connect them in ways that help us understand potential paths that these scenarios can take. And so I'm big in terms of, we don't have an ability anymore to predict the future at any level. I don't care what people say in terms of we're going to have all kinds of data and artificial intelligence is going to help us. That's all true, but it's moving too fast. These dots emerge and connect in ways we never envisioned, and so prediction is impossible. So that says that rehearsing is really the only path forward. So my biggest advice to any leader is you got to be rehearsing incessantly around these scenarios in ways that help you see what kind of path it might be taking, how the shifts occur, and be first to understand these shifts so you can exploit them for the value that they create. So those are some of the biggest pieces of advice that I give.
What are the biggest risks you see companies face? For companies who don't take on rehearsing, what are the biggest risks that you see them facing, other than eventually being disrupted?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the biggest risk in terms of disruption. But I think the big risk in the short term is not just a lack of growth, but actually a loss in terms of current revenue streams. Because as we know, there are so many different ways for value in the way they create it to be delivered in new ways. And so they start to lose market share slowly but surely. And so if you don't understand what's causing the market share erosion, and start to replace that revenue with in new ways, that the biggest risk is just not seeing that dynamic at play, right? We tend to think that we just need to work harder, faster, whatever it is to kind of make up for the shortfalls. But those are structural issues as well. That market share erosion is going to be is real and permanent. So what types of things do they need to do to kind of, in the short term, start to buffer that loss? I think that's the biggest risk. Disruption is the end game in terms of, I think, most businesses and most industries, but market share erosion is the biggest risk.
So your job is a futurist. I bet you, even being a futurist, digital disruption is disrupting that.
Yeah, you know what? There is nothing that isn't being disrupted. Futurists. First of all, futurists kind of fell out of vogue for quite some time, and I think you're starting to see more emphasis placed on futurists. And I do really believe, and this is not just me speaking as a futurist, but speaking in terms of what I think is important, and that is the boards of companies, the executive teams of companies are going to have futurists in place that help them connect these dots, do the things that I was talking about before. But clearly, the ability to see this future at some level, not predict it, but see it at some level, is being disrupted as well, because there are things now, like artificial intelligence, like natural language processing, that can help us see things quicker that are in text format, et cetera. And so speed up the process of seeing this future at some level. I think those are all disruptive scenarios around futures. But I love to tell this story in my keynote addresses. I did a future sports keynote not too long ago at Rutgers University, actually. And it really impressed me in terms of there's nothing safe. If you think about sports, and so everybody can appreciate sports at some level, and where sports is going in the context of virtual reality and holograms, and actually experiencing sports in your home or in a third-party venue where you're actually almost right there in the stadium, or experiencing a holographic replay where you can actually walk around it and see the play right in front of you, or witnessing the game, the football game, through the helmet of Tom Brady and seeing exactly what he's seeing as he's playing the game, or crowdsourced decision making. You're the coach on the sideline, and crowdsourced, people are thinking about what you should call next, and you actually call a play that the crowd thinks is the most likely to succeed, right? So even sports is being disrupted, and let alone genetic engineering and genetic screening and what it's going to do to athletes and enhancing their abilities to perform.
You talked about doing role play so that you can see the future the best of your ability. How did you role play for your own role as a futurist?
Storytelling. So I won't say role play as much as I'll say storytelling. I think the most effective means for anybody to grasp some of what's happening here, and it's complex, it's overwhelming, it's a lot. I mean, I do an hour presentation, and people always walk away always get the same feedback. There's just so much to digest here that it's overwhelming. So the most effective way to role play or to help people grasp complex messages is in storytelling. I think it's fascinating that these stories are emerging, but you have to really be good at telling the story. And I think Virtual and augmented reality, as it plays out, will be a key tool in helping folks not just see a story, not just hear a story, but feel a story. I have a colleague who just went through a storytelling seminar, and in a virtual role playing, he was actually in the room being interrogated by Iranians, and there was somebody blindfolded at the table, and they were trying to get my colleague to admit that he was a spy. And his answers were either a head nod, yes or no. And so he was dictating the interaction and what happened next through AI based on his interaction. And his head nod, when he said, no, I'm not a traitor, ended up getting the other person in the room shot in the head. And he was right there. He said, it was like I was right there feeling the blood splatter on top of me. So think about the storytelling that we can do in that context, where you could actually be right there in the room experiencing that story. I think that's going to lend itself to seeing this future at some level.
What kind of decisions are you making right now that you've never made before?
What kind of decisions? I don't know that I can talk in the context of decisions, but I would say in the context of, I'm going to go back to rehearsing, decisions not being finite, right? Knowing that every decision is directing you or guiding you down a path, but that you have to know that you're probably going to decide something different, or you're going to shift very quickly. I think decision making, we need to infuse it with insight and foresight. And yes, big data and artificial intelligence and everything that's emerging will help us infuse insight and foresight into our decision-making processes. But decisions are not finite. And so we have to realize that things are moving so fast that a decision at one moment could be altered in the next moment, because we're just getting information in real time or right time that helps us to shift our thinking. I think it's fascinating if you think about our connected world and the fact that we can get insights rapidly about something that's happening. I call this phenomenon sense and respond. I think our current management paradigm, which in and of itself is 150 years old. So think about the way we manage. It's archaic, right? So hierarchies, command and control will give way to a sense and respond paradigm that says we're constantly sensing the stimuli in our environment, our ecosystem, and we're responding appropriately. But that response and that sensing is a continual process.
I wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, I'm a lagger. I just oh my God, I'm a lagger. How do I jump on this boat of digital transformation? Do you have any rapid tools that I can leverage so I can get back on the saddle?
So it goes back to my continuous lifelong learning scenario that I mentioned before. I don't think there's a silver bullet here in terms of digital training or digital transformation. It's a journey, unfortunately, a journey that many embarked on too late. I'm still amazed that it's 2017 going on 2018, and we're still, as far as I'm concerned, in the infancy stages of the digital journey. And I say that because digital started more as a sales and marketing kind of phenomena, and it stayed there for a very long time, whereas digital, as we know, is very broad and it impacts everything. So it's a steep learning curve. Obviously, the generations, the millennials and Gen Z are natives. But even, I like to say, they are natives, but I work with universities a lot, and I'm working with college students a lot. So they're obviously Gen Z, millennial kinds of students. And it's interesting, they are digital natives, but certain things like using a Slack, for example, as a collaboration tool, it doesn't come intuitively to them. It's just interesting to me. So no silver bullets, but I do believe that a digital orientation is critical for everyone. So I'd say no silver bullet, but a willingness to learn. And I think the biggest thing that I see is folks just not wanting to learn. I just don't want to be bothered with Facebook or whatever it is, just not a willingness to learn.
I want to give a good big shout out to your employer, TCS. Can you tell all my viewers who TCS is and what you guys do?
Yeah, well, Tata Consultancy Services is part of the big Indian conglomerate called Tata, with businesses in just about every industry, if not every industry. So it's a large conglomerate that takes 63% of its earnings and puts it into a philanthropic trust. So talk about a business that gives back to society. They're really, really good at that. Matter of fact, they just gave $500,000 to the Red Cross for the hurricane relief funds. But very old business. The services piece, the part that I'm in, is over 40 years old. Grew up and born in the offshoring outsourcing business, but now really a strong player across the spectrum of IT and business services. So just a really strong player in the space, the leading Indian firm in this space, and really trying to do more and more in the context of research and innovation.
Awesome. Frank, thank you so much for your time.